right, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming down this afternoon. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida, through the generous support of the Knight Foundation. So a note to our internet audience watching at home, if at any time you'd like to purchase a copy of today's book, just call the number on your screen, and we could ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. So this afternoon, Books and Books is very happy to welcome Mr. Johnathan Tasini, presenting his new book, The Essential Bernie Sanders and His Vision for America. Mr. Tasini is a writer, organizational strategist, and an economics and political analyst. He is the author of the previous books, It's Not Raining, We're Being Peed On, The Scam of the Deficit Crisis, The Audacity of Greed, Free Markets, Corporate Thieves, and the Looting of America, They Get Cake, We Eat Crumbs, the real story behind today's unfair economy, and The Edifice Complex, Rebuilding the American Labor Movement to Face the Global Economy. He has been widely published and is the founder, editor, and publisher of Working Life, a leading progressive blog on work and the economy. In this book, Mr. Tasini draws heavily from Senator Sanders' ample public record of speeches, statements, and interviews, blended with specific legislation he has championed, making this book a must-read for anyone who shares Sanders' vision for a forward-looking, sustainable, and more just United States of America. Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Johnathan Tasini.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody, and really appreciate you all coming out for this discussion. Thank you to Victor for that great introduction, and thank you for this beautiful store. I come from a little island called Manhattan, and so this is my first time to see this store, and I walked into the plaza, I guess you'd call it, and I said, the courtyard, thank you. I said, wow, this is a really cool place. And I would have come here a lot earlier, but I had a previous event in Lake Worth. You know, I always have to think back because this is like the 5th or 6th event that I've done over this weekend in this tour of Florida. So this is just beautiful. And I just had a chance to walk around a little bit and see the bookstore. And so you have the good fortune of having a great independent bookstore, one of the unfortunately dwindling numbers of bookstores. I speak both as pointing that out as a political person, but also as a writer. And so we all know about the situation of bookstores, but what I want to talk about the book, but I really want to talk about the opportunity before us and the campaign a little bit. The book doesn't lend itself to per se a reading, so this is more a little bit of a political conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit and then entertain questions and invite you to kind of give your thoughts about perhaps not the content of the book, but what you're thinking about Bernie Sanders, about the campaign, about politics in general. So as Victor correctly pointed out, this book is 95% Bernie's words. And I have known Bernie Sanders for many, many years, going back probably to the mid-'90s, when I used to get to see him in Washington a lot. I was president of the National Writers Union for 13 years. And as part of, in that role, part of the work I did was lobby on issues, workers' issues essentially, writers' issues, but generally workers' issues, health and safety, wage issues. So I would go down to Washington a lot to talk to members of Congress. And because I operated out of that little island called Manhattan, the Northeast, Bernie was from Vermont, and the region I was part of was in the Northeast, New York. And so we would see Bernie a lot, go to his office. He would come to breakfasts or events that we would have. And I always thought that actually that was kind of a waste of time, honestly, because Bernie was with us 100% of the time. And I always think that when you go and lobby, really what you should do is focus on the people that you're trying to persuade, right? Those who are wavering in the middle, those who aren't with us, and unfortunately there are too many of those members of elected in Congress that are not with the people, not with workers. But it was still really great because he is who he is today. He was that same person 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. And about it'll be 3 years in April, I got a chance to spend a lot of time with him. I interviewed him for Playboy magazine. And I had done previously an interview for Playboy. I interviewed Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist. And what I really wanted to do, the reason I wanted to put Bernie in that magazine, was I wanted him to reach a lot of people who probably didn't know who he was. And one of my life missions is not to talk to the converted, and not just to talk to the people who read The Nation magazine. If there's anybody that still does that here, I think there probably is. Nation's a good magazine, but not to talk to that small group of people who always agree with me. And they were very excited about it. And back 3 years ago, you may remember, that was around the time of the economic collapse, the crisis, the greed on Wall Street. And Bernie had been speaking about this for years, about the dangers of the big banks, about the billionaires, about inequality. This isn't something new to him. So I got to spend a lot of time with him, and that's when we got to know each other a lot better. And the two things, and then I want to get into the conversation about some issues, the two things that I want to mention from the book that are in the introduction is, number one, I was, I think, one of the first people to talk to him about running for president at that period of time. And he really was not ready to do that. And he told me, 99% sure I'm not going to run for president. And I was kidding him about this. Now, that was 3 years ago. But really the most important thing about that conversation was what he said at the time, that even though he was not going to run for president, he didn't think so, he was convinced that the majority of the American people were with him on the issues. And we talked about the notion of expanding Social Security, the notion of breaking up the big banks, about the greed on Wall Street and in corporations, about the terrible trade deals that have been forced down the American people's throats. He was convinced, if you just looked at the polling, that the majority of people were with him. And he said, and I think this is in the interview, I can't remember whether this particular passage is there, he said he's not amazed by that fact. He's amazed by what he says his friends in Congress, in the Senate, and you know, there is this kind of rule that you call everybody a friend. My friend across the other aisle, even though they're running dog terrible people, and you really want to say something else. But there is, if you watch C-SPAN, which I do, which shows you what my social life is like and what I'm addicted to, if you watch C-SPAN, they all say, my friend on the other side of the aisle. Or I would like to join with my friend and say so-and-so. And even his friends on the Democratic side of the aisle, he would say, why are they supporting policies that the vast majority of the American people are against? Why do they go to the floor of the Senate and push for more tax breaks for corporations and rich people? And by the way, I'm not talking specifically now about the clown car Republican Party, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody here who's a Republican. I'm talking about the Democratic Party. He was astounded that people he knew, Democrats, were going to the floor of the Senate, proposing legislation to get more tax cuts for rich people, more tax cuts for billionaires, more tax cuts for corporations, that they were actually going and supporting policies that would cut Social Security, not expand Social Security. And unfortunately, too many Democrats have proposed, and it's all in coded language, cutting Social Security. And he could not fathom that. Completely in an honest way, he couldn't fathom that. The second thing from the book, which is more about Bernie himself, there was a time when we finished a conversation in his Burlington office, and he's in this pretty nondescript, low-rise building in Burlington. Anybody here from Burlington? No, okay. You never know who you run into on the campaign trail. And I walked outside, and I stood in the plaza. I will say this plaza is just not too far down from the original Ben & Jerry's, which everybody can relate to. And I had finished a conversation with him. I think we had spent 3 hours. And I'm telling you, the first thing that what struck me was one word: authentic. that the authenticity of that man was just astounding. And I had known that over time, but you really don't get to know that unless about a human being until you spend a lot of time face to face. And as I say in the introduction, I've known a lot of politicians in my political life. I've done politics my whole adult life. And even the good people, and I think I can say this on the internet, right? There's a certain amount of bullshit with all politicians, even the ones who are progressive. Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York City, known him for 25 years. We first worked together in the first David Dinkins campaign, the campaign to elect the first African-American mayor of New York City. Bill's a good guy, certain amount of bullshit. I'm sorry, Bill, if you're seeing this right now. You can send me an email and tell me that's not a nice thing to say about you. But every single one, and it's partly because they get into politics, and as good as they are, there's something about it. They've listened to some poll that somebody told them. They've got an advisor saying, you got to phrase it this way. That is not Bernie Sanders. And the person you see, if you haven't actually been to a rally of his, but the person you see probably on TV, online, speaking to 20,000 people in those massive rallies is the very same person who will say the exact same thing in the same way if you're sitting across the table with him one-on-one. And I think that's really important because I think it speaks to why people are just coming out in droves and why there's so much excitement around this political revolution. That his authenticity, particularly young people who kind of see through bullshit pretty easily, it is just catching on because people really feel that even when you disagree with him, which happens, authenticity. The best example I'll give, if you haven't watched this, and thank God for YouTube, I'll refer to this several times, YouTube, you can go check it out. When he went to speak to Jerry Falwell's Liberty University, if you have not seen that video, take the time to watch that because it will blow you away. Here is a man who goes down essentially into the lion's den. Let's face it, he goes down to speak to 12,000 people who are not going to agree with him on most issues, mostly social issues. And that speech, it was one of those things, and I've heard him hundreds of times, and every single time I'm moved by him. I don't have any, I'm not sort of biased anymore, or I don't have any kind of, I'm not tired of hearing him. And that particular one was really astounding because here he is standing before 12,000 people, and he captivated them. Now, he didn't necessarily persuade them, but he up front said, look, we're not going to agree on same-sex marriage or abortion or on many social issues. And then he immediately connected with them by talking about inequality and poverty as it relates to the Bible. And he was able to reach down and touch those people to the point where most of the post-interviews that I saw, and again, it's somewhat a select number. I wasn't there polling people myself. But the one thing that was, the one point that everyone made was, I really thought that guy was speaking what he really believed, that he was authentic. And I think actually that when Bernie is the candidate for the Democratic nomination, when he wins it, which he will, and he is in the general election, I think some of those people who are at Liberty University will vote for him because they're going to do what a lot of people in Vermont who are relatively conservative, in rural areas, they vote for somebody like that because they may not agree with him on 100% of the issues, but they think the man is genuine. They think he tells the truth. And that is one thing that I think is coursing through the American public more than anything. Now, usually, what I've been doing, traveling the country, speaking for Bernie, I do something called Bernie 101. And it's kind of a distillation of this book, and I have all these big posters up, and we do a little educational thing, mostly for people, activists, so that they can figure out how to talk about these things. And the first thing that I talk about is really what this election is about. It's the difference between a political revolution and the status quo. That's bottom line. If you want to know why Bernie is running and why we should support him, and I'm not presuming that everybody here is on board this incredible trip, this incredible political revolution. It's because it's the difference of having truly a different future, having really a political revolution, or staying with the status quo. And I'm not talking about the Republicans now. I'm talking about the one candidate who is a status quo candidate. As much as she would like to tell you otherwise and change her views every week depending on what the polls say and not tell the truth about what would actually happen in her administration, that is the status quo. And I think people are going to reject that. Now, I believe that Bernie is going to win. I think we are going to win Iowa. I think we are going to win New Hampshire. I think now we potentially are going to win Nevada, which was not a state. That comes third on February 20th. And potentially we're going to do very well in South Carolina. I don't know that we're going to win it, that we have enough time. And then once we go into the Super Tuesday states, we're going to do very well. Now, when Bernie first decided to run, I'm going to shift a little bit now and talk about the campaign and some of the things that are happening, and then talk a little bit about some of the issues. When Bernie first decided to run, and he announced he was running in May, I had no doubt, I'm telling you this honestly, no doubt that he could win on the issues. No doubt that the American people are fed up with both parties. I'm not saying anything that probably most of you don't know. No doubt that they are fed up with the Democratic Party, with the way in which the party has basically turned itself over to corporate lobbyists and has assisted this corruption of politics, and that frankly goes back to Bill Clinton. No doubt that he could win. The one question I wasn't sure about, because I've been around a lot of insurgent campaigns in my lifetime, which is meaning I usually supported losing campaigns. The one thing I didn't know was, could he raise enough money? And we've answered that. I mean, the amount of money that has been raised. It is true that politics has been corrupted. It is true that there are super PACs and billionaires trying to buy this election. But the people out there are saying something different. The people are giving us the opportunity to actually have a political revolution. $74 million in 6 months. And I'll tell you right now, I believe that when he does win Iowa and New Hampshire within a week or two, he'll raise another $20 or $25 million in that period of time. From the 1 million contributors who can still give a lot more money, it's not like the status quo candidate where she has people writing $2,700 checks, which is the maximum you can give. I know that everybody here are billionaires, so you've probably already, I can tell by looking at this crowd, you've already maxed out. I'm sorry, you can't give Bernie any more money. But our contributors are average $31 or $32. They can continue to give multiple times. And when he wins Iowa and New Hampshire, there's going to be a huge number of people that come into the campaign because most of us, I'm going to just guess that you're all junkies in some way, political junkies. You pay attention to politics. Most people don't. And most people don't pay attention to politics until they absolutely have to. But what happens when a political earthquake happens, which is what the media is going to describe when we win in Iowa and New Hampshire, people are going to pay attention. And people are going to jump on the bandwagon because that's the way people are. And they're also going to be incredibly excited and energized. So I think that he will raise a huge amount of money. And that's so important because once we move into the Super Tuesday states, the big states, it's unfortunately not about knocking on doors. It's about an ad war. That's just a fact. Super Tuesday has 11 states, 11 or 12 states, all over the country, big media buys. Bernie can compete. He can win states, and he will not have to be like most insurgent candidates that I've supported, trying to rub, two nickels together. We fielded an amazing staff out there in all the 4 early states, and I've traveled to all the early 4 states. I'm going back. I'll tell you a little bit about that starting Tuesday. We have 170 people on the ground in Iowa. And some of the things that are happening are both are amazing. I was talking to the national field director a couple of days ago. I was actually in St. Petersburg. We were about to do an event that night, and he told me that there was an event that they were about to have in Muscatine, I think, for 200 people, and 600 people showed up. And that is repeating itself. It's already happening in Iowa on the ground. You may have noticed, and I noticed this, I'm going to say a bad thing. While I was driving, I was checking my phone. I know I shouldn't do that. Are there any police officers in the audience that are going to? And there's a new poll that just came out today basically saying that they're tied in Iowa, that he's essentially tied. Now, I believe we're going to win that overwhelmingly. That, and I can't tell too much out of school, but I'll say this, that if the people turn out, that we've identified, the campaign is identified, it won't be close. I mean, it'll be like Barack Obama kind of victory. Now, people have to turn out, and on February 1st, if there's a foot of snow that's coming down, you just don't know. But if the ones and twos, and just to fill people in on the sort of the campaign lingo, you sort of rank people, when you call people up and identify them from 1 to 5. 1 are the people that will basically walk on hot coals to vote for you. 5s are the people who would actually like to take hot coals and, make you walk on them, but make you stand on them for a while. And the numbers of 1s and 2s are just astounding, like wild. And I think that's being reflected in the crowds. The polls and the media hasn't caught up to that because they're kind of, well, we can talk about the media and maybe the question and answer, but there's an earthquake going on in Iowa. It's pretty astounding. Again, people have to show up and caucus. But if we get our people out, that will happen. I want to talk about, I'm going to come back to sort of the ground and a little bit of my journey for Bernie. And I do want to say that this has been the greatest privilege of my life to do this for Bernie. He's asked me to be a surrogate for him, which is I talk on, part of it's going on TV, which is kind of, it's annoying because it takes up actually a enormous amount of time for about 3 minutes. The greatest thing that I've been able to do, and I'm doing, is I'm going actually out into the field and talking to people. And what I try to do when I go out into the field, and I'll give you a couple of examples, is that Bernie 101 that I mentioned, I try to kind of communicate that. Like, how do you talk about a lot of complicated issues or issues that people want easy answers for in really simple language? And so Tuesday, I'm going back to New Hampshire, and then there through Saturday, turn around and I'll be in Iowa for 2 weeks, right through the caucus day. So I know, hopefully you have a little sympathy for me, those of you who are here in Florida, what Iowa is like at this time of year. And then I'm going back to New Hampshire, which is not that warm. But it is an extraordinary experience if you haven't actually gone. Has anybody been to the Iowa caucuses? Have you had a chance? Oh, it's really kind of, there's a lot of criticism about Iowa being not representative of America, which is true. But the process of watching a caucus and watching people gather in different parts of a room and try to persuade each other is quite fascinating, and how you turn people out and how those delegates are allocated. And then I'm going to a relatively normal primary state. Not entirely, some primary states are different, but New Hampshire has the history of being quite an interesting primary state because it can both sink candidacies and give lift and save candidacies. But when I go out on the ground, and to give you a couple of examples of some of the things that are happening that I think are evocative and tell us a lot about what's happening, I run into a lot of people. I've had this happen in Iowa and New Hampshire who have not been in politics before. I've had a number of people who say they've been lifelong Republicans and will never vote for Republic again, but partly because of that, as I mentioned, that clown car, but that they're Bernie people and they're going to change their registration and vote for Bernie. And it is because of this sense of a political revolution that's happening. In Iowa, and it's drifting down, the conversation is drifting down to young people. And when I mean young people, I mean teenagers. I went to a small town in Anamosa, Iowa. And small, I think Anamosa has probably 20,000 people, which I guess I'm biased. I come from Manhattan. That seems small. And the people there don't get to see Bernie Sanders that often. So they sent me there to talk to teenagers. So we had this round table of a bunch of teenagers. And one of the teenagers, there were 2 teenagers in particular, who were really quite fascinating in one sense, is that both of them admitted that they probably would not have come to that round table had they not gotten the afternoon off. So it was sort of a field trip that was organized by their teacher, who was a Bernie supporter. She had to be kind of a closet Bernie supporter because the trip had to be seen as nonpartisan. It was part of political education in order to get kids the time off. But if you're a teenager and someone says you get to have an hour and a half or 2 hours out of school, come on, where can I sign up for that? That's pretty cool. But both of them, halfway through the conversation, something changed. And the kid, the boy, who was 17, his issue was guns. And we had a back and forth about the issue of guns, which at the time was in the media, and I think it was a completely fabricated debate. And he said, look, I come from a very Republican family, very conservative family, and we believe in guns, we believe in hunting. And I said, look, Bernie doesn't want to stop you from going out and shooting deer. I said, I'm not a hunter. I said about me. If you want to go out and shoot a deer, more power to you. What Bernie has always said is that he wants to take away those guns that are about mass slaughter. They're only about killing large numbers of people. And he nodded. And he said, yeah, but I could still shoot somebody with my rifle. And I said, that's true. We're not going to stop everybody. We can't prevent someone who's deranged, mentally ill, angry from using a rifle that you would kill a deer with to shoot somebody. That's the horror. That's the reality. But we can stop mass shootings in theaters, and we can stop mass shootings in schools, as the current president has pointed out in the last few days. So he smiled. He was quiet. And then the 16-year-old girl to my right raised her hand. She says, you were talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour over several years. And I've always been told that that's a starter wage, that that's for teenagers like me, and that I should just be happy to get that small minimum wage because that's my first job. And I was also told that we can't raise the minimum wage because then people go out of business. So I said to her two things about the starter wage. The first thing is just false. It's not true. The majority of people working at the minimum wage today are actually adults. Many of them have families and children. Many of them are actually older workers in their 40s and 50s, those people who actually once had good industrial jobs, union jobs that went away thanks to Bill Clinton and NAFTA and other similar bad trade agreements. And those people are now ending up in those minimum wage jobs. Those are not starter jobs. But then I said to her, but why should anybody exploit you even if you're a teenager? If you're doing the work, why should you not get a living wage? Why should you not be able to come home with a paycheck and say to your parents, I don't need your money to fill up my car with gas. I don't need your money to buy a dress. I don't need your money to go to the theater, to go to the movies. I can do it myself. It's just that we've learned these things. We've accepted this nonsense about the free market and about competition. We've not challenged it. And that's what this political revolution is about. It's not the status quo. It's about challenging all those things that we have come to accept as if they're handed down from heaven, that as if they're religion and they shouldn't be challenged, that people should survive on poverty wages. And you could see like this understanding all of a sudden dawn on her. And then I said, it's true. And we have to accept the fact that if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over several years, your Big Mac is going to cost a few cents more. And when you go to the car wash, getting your car washed is going to cost a little bit more. And I didn't even have to say anything more because she said the next sentence, which was, but I'll be making more money so I can afford it. Now that's the wisdom of a 16-year-old that is easy to come to if you have a rational conversation and you're willing to expand the conversation. And that's what the political revolution is designed to do. Foreign policy. And I want to touch on this because this is important. And it's come up a lot in the last few weeks, partly because of what happened in Paris and then what happened in Sacramento. One of the raps about this election among the Democrats, which has been picked up by the media and promulgated, is that the candidate of the status quo has an enormous amount of experience in foreign policy. And therefore, she's the one that we need in place now because of the situation in the world, particularly around the Middle East. And that Bernie Sanders doesn't have that experience. And I'm going to say this to the internet, this is bullshit. And I've taken it on in various on TV too that it's just not true. And there's some very concrete examples for that. I'm going to give you two of them. In my view, the most consequential vote, bar none, in the last 2 decades on foreign policy, the most consequential decision was the Iraq War. Bar none. And if you go back to YouTube and look at what Bernie Sanders said in 2002 when, as a member of the House, he stood on the House floor and gave the reasons that he would not vote for this immoral war. And he said, we have no idea how many people are going to die in this war. And he said, not just Americans, Iraqis. He had enough of the sense of humanity to think not just about soldiers and our men and women in uniform, which is important, but the fact that we were about to launch a war that he knew would kill hundreds of thousands of people. He said, we do not know how much this will cost. And in fact, Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winning economist, has estimated that the war has cost us around $3 trillion if you take up all the costs together and counting. Because all those men and women who went to war, an illegal, immoral war, came back with horrible, horrible injuries, physical and mental, things that we don't see. That probably there's hundreds of thousands of them that we are going to have to and should care for decades to come, which will cost an enormous amount of money. And the third thing he said, he actually said several other things, but I'm boiling it down to 3 points. He said, look, Saddam Hussein is a brutal dictator. No one is going to stand in any place and defend Saddam Hussein. He's a murderer. But what's going to happen when he's gone? What's going to replace Saddam Hussein? When you fracture that country and that region, what is going to happen? Now, he could not have used the acronym ISIS at the time because no one knew what ISIS was, but he understood that that's what would come. And he says now more recently, actually in the debates in the current political campaign, I did not trust George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. By the way, are there any Democrats here who trusted those three? By the way, I just want to be clarified. I mean, criminals who actually should have been indicted and should be serving time in jail, should have been impeached, but we don't have the spine to do that. And now what I would have liked Bernie to do, certainly in debate, but he's a much better person than I am, I would have then turned and I would have said, and you did trust George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. And I say that because of the enormity of what the war has meant and continues to mean for our relationships around the world, and to say, who do you want in the White House making judgments about things that we do not know now, crises that are going to come? Someone who had the moral principles to oppose the war, because he stood in the well of the House under enormous pressure. Everybody remembers the hysteria back then, and was able to give a very concrete understanding of what would happen without necessarily talking about all the intelligence reports, the ones that Hillary Clinton did not bother to read. He was able to do that, and she wasn't. And I would submit to the country and to people to think about that. Who has the understanding of foreign policy and the world and how you deal with the world? The candidate of the political revolution or the status quo? Now, the second example, which happened more recently, which to me was even more, well, it was astounding. Been in politics a long time, and I've never seen this happen on a national stage. And it got almost no very little attention on the part of, frankly, a lot of my friends. We didn't pay attention to it. Maybe I'm a little bit was obsessed about it, about foreign policy. The media certainly didn't pay attention. You may remember that when this foreign policy debate issue came up in the second debate, it was a short answer. Bernie basically gave a recounting of all the countries that the United States intervened in and basically screwed up. And he actually talked about the CIA overthrowing democratically elected leaders. Go back and listen to that again, or read the transcript if you don't remember. He talked about Chile, about Guatemala. He talked about Iran, about overthrowing the democratically elected head of Iran then, Mossadegh, who was overthrown by a CIA coup, which led to the Shah of Iran, which then led to the Islamic Revolution. And I was astounded, not surprised, because this is the man that I think is just an incredible leader. At a time of this debate, and I'm sure he thought about this before, he was able to draw together decades of history to explain to the people around the world, around the nation, that we've messed up, that we screwed up in the world, and that we should not repeat those mistakes. Most candidates, again, I leave out for a minute the clown car Republicans, but most candidates, Democrats, are afraid to do that. They're all still about America's number one, America's great. You know, they all wear the lapel pins and they all mouth, "We support the troops." Hillary Clinton does this all the time. I support the troops. There's all these slogans, but nobody of a national candidate stature has ever stood on the stage and said, the United States of America is not a horrendous country, but we've made terrible mistakes that have cost people their lives and come back to haunt us. And so I would say that if you take that vote in the Iraq War and the more recent example of Bernie being able to stand there before audiences and explain that, there's no doubt in my mind that he's far more equipped to lead us and be in the White House and understand the moral principles that should guide foreign policy. I want to talk about two more things, and then let's have a little conversation. So, those of you, I think a lot of you have been in, I like to walk around, but I know I have to stand in front of this mic because of the internet, because of all the people watching. I tend to pace a lot, actually. When I'm on the phone at home, this is how I exercise. You know, I just walk back and forth. So, in case you couldn't tell, my whole adult life, and I'm going to say something that probably you all have experienced in politics, every 4 years, and sometimes every 2 years, people will say, this is the most important election of your lifetime, right? You remember that? I'm sure you've experienced that. And I've never bought that, because in my experience, every single election is important. Think of what would happen if the Supreme Court of the United States had not handed the White House to George Bush. How different this world would have looked. How many people would still be living today if he had not had the keys to the White House, he and that other criminal, Dick Cheney, who was actually probably the de facto president. Think about that. And so I view every single election as important because there are huge consequences. And we could go back to every single election. 1992, you know, sure, it was, I guess, electing Bill Clinton was better than having George H.W. Walker Bush. But remember that it was Bill Clinton that pushed through NAFTA. It was Bill Clinton that, serving the bankers, got rid of Glass-Steagall, which essentially led to the collapse and to the economic crisis. So every election has consequences. Now, I would have wanted Bush to win, but those elections have consequences. But this election is different. And what I've been saying, and as I've talked to people, is this election I believe we should look at as an election of opportunity. An election of opportunity that may not come back to us, at least in my lifetime. There's some younger people here, so maybe you'll get lucky. I see a couple of younger people back there. Younger than me. I feel young, but younger. This is an election of opportunity. comes along, very rare, a man named like Bernie Sanders. A man like Bernie Sanders comes along very rarely at a time like this, when people are just fed up with politics, just have had it with both parties. And as the speaker before had mentioned before I came out, it could go either way. It could go to the dark side and appeal to the worst in us, which is what Donald Trump does, or it could go to the bright side. And when I go talk to people, I say, look, if I could tell you that if you made 5 more phone calls than you're willing to do, or give $20 more than you've given, and devote yourself in the next month in a way that you have never done before, that you put everything aside. I mean, you have to get up and go to work, you have to do your homework, but that Bernie Sanders in this campaign and this political revolution is the most central thing. If I told you that if you did that for a month, we could change the course of history in this country and the world, would you do that? Yes, I see some nodding. Would you do that? And I'm telling you that that's a possibility. That what we have is an opportunity because of what Bernie represents. And the thing I'll end with is the amazing thing, in addition to who he is and how he talks about these issues, is that he understands that it isn't about him. It really is about us. Everybody, the media in particular, says, well, Bernie Sanders is going to get elected, but he'll never get anything done. He's got all these Republicans. And Bernie always understands that. He understands that when he is inaugurated, and I tell you he will be inaugurated on January 20th, 2017, we've got a decade fight ahead of us. A decade fight not just with Republicans, but with the Democratic Party. And I think we can win that fight, but it has to start today. So, putting on my organizer hat, I'm asking you to really dig deep. And I don't necessarily mean in your wallet, I mean in your time. If you haven't volunteered yet, you have to volunteer. This is about our political future, and this could make a big difference. This could change the course of history. If you volunteered for 2 hours, volunteer for 5 hours. I'm giving up my whole life from now until the end of the New Hampshire primary. I consider it a privilege. When the campaign says thank you to me, no, I say, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this political revolution, and I hope you'll be a part of it too. Thank you very much. So I'll take questions for however long you think we can do, and then I'll be happy to, as I said, they'll sell you a book happily, and I will happily sign it for you. And if you can say, I'll start here and I'll just poke around. If you don't mind saying your name.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Levy.
Because I'll say it for the camera. Phyllis.
Yes, and so I see one of the crucial keys to winning this campaign is getting the minority voters on board. And you know, what is Bernie planning to do, like speaking in churches and really trying to make them understand that it's in their best interest to support him?
So the question Phyllis asked was about reaching out to minority voters and bringing them in and being part of the campaign. Good question, Phyllis. There's a practicality of this that isn't as important in Iowa and New Hampshire, you might imagine, but it is very important for society as a whole, but certainly on a practical level when we get to South Carolina, where the African-American vote in particular is very, very important in South Carolina, disproportionately a large percentage. So I would say a few things. The first thing is I was in South Carolina actually with Cornel West. It's been now almost 2.5, 3 months. And it's important to note that it was a long time ago because a lot of things have changed. And Cornel and I were in this meeting. I was just an observer of a small group of African-American clergy and local elected leaders. And basically Cornel said the following: we've been asleep. We've accepted the fact that somehow the Clintons were good for our community, and it isn't true. And our job, meaning the people sitting there, and they were all essentially more or less already supporting Bernie or close to, our job is to awaken people and to speak to people. And the second thing that happened, which I think was a really good thing, was the whole Black Lives Matter challenge to our campaign, to Bernie and then to others. Now, why did they take on Bernie Sanders first because he is the most accessible. Can you imagine if that had happened with all the Secret Service around the status quo candidate or someone else, Trump? They had access to Bernie because it's a very open campaign. And it was tough for the campaign, in a sense, because there was a lot of intense coverage of it. But I think it was a terrific thing, and I compliment and praise the activists around Black Lives Matter because they put it on the agenda. We are talking about racism in a way, and the fact that African Americans in particular are being shot down by police largely because of Black Lives Matter. You know, African Americans were being shot by police for years, every month, regularly. Nobody seemed to care. But now, every time that happens, there's attention to that. And so they really put it on the map. And I feel, and I'm biased, I think the Sanders campaign has responded to that in engaging the leadership, in really listening to that. And if you look at the emphasis now on, and one of the big posters I have, which I don't have here, because it would have been hard and not nice to put that on the books, you know, tape it up, is about civil rights and the fact that it's our obligation, all of us, and the Sanders campaign has been very clear about this, it's our obligation to challenge institutional racism wherever it is, for lots of reasons that are also, by the way, economic. The second thing I'd say is that the challenge to Bernie around the African American community and the non-white community is in some way no different than the challenge he has about everybody. A lot of people don't know who he is as a senator from Vermont. And the meeting I mentioned 3 months ago in South Carolina, a lot has happened since then in South Carolina, where you've had now African American leaders come out and endorse Bernie. There's groundwork to be done. And most people who run for president, at the very least, start out 2 years in advance to start putting together fundraising operations, support. Bernie started in May. Okay, and when you think about what's been accomplished, it's kind of astounding. But there's a lot of work to be done to just reach people, touch people. This is why you're all important. This is why I go to all these meetings and travel and talk to people, because the more we talk to people, the more that word gets around to everybody, through not just the traditional media, but all the social media. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's very crucial. I think we're making progress, and I'm very proud to be a part of the campaign that has recognized both racism and talks about it explicitly.
One of the problems that the campaign has been experiencing is that the so-called media airtime has been sucked out as a result of establishment. What do you think we can do about that, other than winning in Iowa and New Hampshire?
Well, I'll say three things. One is Bernie's talked about media monopoly for at least a decade, if not 2 decades, recognizes the problem, has tried to challenge it. You're absolutely right that the media has created Donald Trump in particular. I was at my gym, stretching on the floor, and through this glass window, I saw the bank of TVs from afar, and there was this image of, breaking news, the red thing that they put up, and I saw a plane flying, and I thought, oh my God, what happened? And I thought, maybe somebody was being returned from captivity, a plane had crashed. It was Donald Trump coming to a rally of his. And not only did CNN cover that, it's one of those shots you have of the camera following the plane. It's actually doesn't say anything. Not only did they do that, they broke to commercial, and then they came back to that same shot. And I've challenged them. I was on the CNN thing with Chris Cuomo, and I said, you guys have refused to cover. He got very defensive. He said, no, CNN, whenever Bernie's wanted to get on, we've let him on. It is absolutely true. The media has done a horrendous job, horrendous. It is sort of one of the next examples about the entire failure of the media to educate the public and to do its job. And I speak as someone who considers myself partly a journalist. Now, that said, because by nature I'm an optimistic person, as you can tell when I've told you Bernie's going to win, I think we shouldn't sink into the dark side about this. And I think we should look at all the channels in media that have opened up. Bernie is the leading person regularly on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Snapchat, which are reaching hundreds of thousands of people. When the Republican debate was happening, I can't remember which one. Bernie was the person who was trending, the leading trending topic on Twitter during the Republican debate, because he was tweeting it and his whole army of people were retweeting and discussing it. That's astounding. And I think that one of the reasons that, it's not the only reason that young people are turning out, part of the reason that young people are turning out because they like the idea of free tuition for college, for example. But I think it's also reaching younger people because they don't watch ABC News. They don't watch CNN. They've got their phones, as I do, frankly. I don't mean to just point younger people out in this. I do that too. I get a lot more of my news. I don't watch the evening news anymore. It used to be like religion. I used to do that with my father, right? Sit down and watch Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather. And my father used to mimic them all the time. I don't even know who's actually doing the evening news anymore. So I only say that because I think we should continue to hold the media responsible, and the New York Times and those that do set some of the agenda, but at the same time, let's understand what really is working. And one of the reasons we're raising money, and one of the reasons our message is spreading. Yes, sir, and then I'll come around, and then, did you read? Yes. Somebody back, oh, yes, you were next, and then you next. The gentleman here.
Yes, my name is Fernando.
I'm just going to get water while I'm listening to you.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Okay. And my big problem in the terminology or the presentation for Sanders is the name of socialism.
Uh-huh.
And socialism means, for me, and believe for many people, like the devil.
Uh-huh.
And actually it is. And why he insists in you, when we started to see him, I use socialism, I turn off. I'm here because my two youngest sons told me about, and other young people told me about, we don't have option, I said. Oh, you need to go to see Sanders.
Okay.
And for that reason I started. But still, the term socialism is a very bad meaning in the world. Nobody likes to be socialist.
So,
Well,
no, hold on.
Can you explain what is socialism?
Well,
Can you explain what is socialism for me? Because I don't know. Why
Oh, no,
so
I cannot-
So just for the internet people, there's a little debate going back and forth about what socialism. I'm trying to help them because they.
know what is socialism.
So, but you know what? I think this is
Can you say so?
this is a black hole that we could go down to and spend an hour on. Let me just answer this. I think about Bernie Sanders. First of all, he says he's a democratic socialist, and if you look in Europe, actually, that's what most of Europe is: democratic socialist governments. Now, some of them have become less so, more so. But if you look at what underpins their societies, they are free health care, pensions, and all sorts of other things that I associate with democratic socialism. There's two things about Bernie that I think actually commend him to be the president. First thing, he doesn't mind saying that. And every other single candidate who was not genuine would try to dance around it. Well, I once believed that in college, I didn't inhale, kind of thing. They would dance around. He explicitly says, I am a democratic socialist. And from my point of view, I think that at the very least, at the end of this campaign, nobody's going to think other than, okay, fine. We're really advancing the dialogue in this country. Here's the more important thing. He then says, and he explains it in completely American terms. Here's what I'm for. Expanding Social Security. Majority of people support expanding Social Security. If you go to a group of young people and say, I'm a democratic socialist, and I want you to have free tuition for your entire college career so you'll come out with no debt. Those college students don't remember the two words democratic socialism. What they hear is free tuition. What Bernie says is, as a democratic socialist, I want to have free health care from cradle to grave for everybody. And when we do it, you're going to pay less out of your pocket. We're going to reduce health care costs and make the economy more vibrant. That's what democratic socialism stands for. And I'll tell you, every other country that that's democratic socialist has free health care. We're the only insane country that has a completely stupid health care system that's eating up 15% of our gross domestic product. I think when Bernie's the nominee, I don't think it's going to matter in the primary. I honestly think the Democratic voters have gotten past that. Not everybody, but in terms of winning or losing, they've gotten past it. I think the Republican Party will try to run tons of ads like that, and I think they'll fail. And particularly if Donald Trump or Ted Cruz are the nominees. Oh, please, please, can you? I'm not a religious man, but if you do that, I promise to repent. If they're the nominees, it will be an electoral wipeout. We will win going away. And I do not believe that the American people, at this point, had it been 10 years ago, I would have been concerned. But I think the crisis that we're facing now, what they're going to hear, free health care, no more immoral wars, expanding Social Security, breaking up the big banks that have robbed you. So that's my answer to, I'm proud that he's saying what he is. And I think it feeds into people feeling that he's authentic.
My point that I wanted to make is in regards to Hillary Clinton's experience as a foreign policy expert.
Yes.
She said on a debate that she made a mistake in Iraq. But that in itself is a lie. Based on the fact that few years later, she did that vote in 2003. On 2011, she voted for Libya to be done the same thing that happened in Iraq. She voted and led that charge. And it seems to me that in many ways, Bernie needs to start pointing these things out, because it's really important to make a differentiation. And just to finish a point regarding the press, the New York Times had a very nice article today. Even Donna Brazil, who has been viewed as a pro-Hillary person, is starting to change her tune.
So I'll focus on, again, for the internet audience, repeating the question. The question was, and I'll just more or less repeat what you said, that Hillary Clinton has lied about saying that her vote for the Iraq war was a mistake. And it's shown to be proven that because she then supported the effort in Libya. So here's the thing about lies. You can only, I think, prove a lie if you get inside somebody's head, with the exception of Donald Trump, because he is a pathological liar. I think you can only prove that if you get inside somebody's head, or you find a piece of paper that says, I actually believe this and I voted the other way. I will say some very concrete things. Hillary Clinton did not read the intelligence reports. She was urged to do so by former Senator Bob Graham, your own senator here from Florida. You can go look it up. He voted against the war. I once saw him in an airport, I think it was, and I said, thank you for pointing that out. She didn't bother to read the intelligence reports. Now, why would somebody of some understanding decide not to read the intelligence reports? It's because she had already made a decision about how she was going to vote, and I think it had nothing to do with the facts. I think it was about her political career. That's my view. If it wasn't that, and it was a mistake, what exactly was the mistake? She does not explain exactly what the mistake was. She just said, I made a mistake, and then she goes on. And so I think, honestly, I think that she understands that that's a huge vulnerability for her. I maintain that had she not voted for the Iraq War, she would have won the election in 2008, not Barack Obama. And we sort of forget in the kind of almost deification of Barack Obama, of his campaign at least. What an amazing candidate. Well, had they lost Iowa, it would have been over. And all the books that have been written by his consultants admit that. And the reason they lost Iowa, in my view, was the Iraq War. That is significant because the Iowa electorate in the Democratic primary is very liberal, progressive. A significant number of those people, I know people who said that, would never vote for Hillary Clinton because of the war. And they voted for Barack Obama because he said he opposed the war. Now, he was not in the Senate at the time, but he at least gave one speech where he was against the war. But that was enough for people. And so I think that's a great vulnerability. And the last point I want to make about this, because I think the war thing is important, and the question of foreign policy, I think we often conflate in our political debate the difference between knowledge and wisdom. There is no doubt in my mind that if I had a Jeopardy contest with Hillary Clinton, or if Bernie Sanders did, she would probably win if it was, please name all these people who head countries. She knows who's the head of the president of Kazakhstan. I couldn't tell you who it is. She knows who the president of every obscure place is, and she does, if you notice in the debate, she makes a point of doing that because she's trying to convey to people, you see, I know all this stuff. That's not the same thing as having the wisdom and a set of principles that lead you to a wise decision. And the Iraq War is the perfect thing. So I grant her knowledge. I think she is someone who has a lot of knowledge and intelligent. That isn't the same thing as wisdom. And that doesn't make a good leader necessarily. Yes?
Do you think that Bernie's campaign has had the effect of moving Hillary more to the left on a lot of issues?
Well, I think the answer is yes, obviously. She supports the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But she's now against it. By the way, important point, it's not just because of Bernie Sanders, it's because of all of you. The reason this stuff has moved left and progressive is because of all the activity that people have done. The reason she's against the Trans-Pacific Partnership is because millions of people made phone calls, went, out into the streets, and have tried to move against that. And the polling says that it's not a popular thing. And I could go down the list. She was never for marriage equality. This is one of the things that really gets to me, that she played with people's lives. She stood on the Senate floor. I'm sorry if I get upset about this. She stood on the Senate floor and talked about how defended the Defense of Marriage Act and said that marriage is between a man and a woman. And the only reason she changed her position has nothing to do with principle. It has to do with the fact that people changed what the country thought about it, and that she was forced then to adopt that view. And I'm going to quickly go, because I think the manager wants to wrap it. Okay, I'm going to come to you for 5 questions over here, and then somebody over here, and then we'll wrap, and then I'll sign books and sell. Is that okay, Victor? Okay, I'll go quickly.
What's Bernie doing to appeal to the older generation that still watches television and reads the local newspaper?
Expand Social Security. Do we need to say anything more?
Medicare.
Yes.
My name is Martin Vecchio, and my question is, given that Bernie wins the general, the changes that he's bringing, they're really big.
Yep.
And he's fighting against a huge machinery, oil companies, military complex,
Yep.
Insurance, banks.
So how is he going to make those
even
changes?
the CIA.
So how is he going to make those changes? So the question to the internet audience was something that comes up a lot. Bernie wins. How does he make all these changes with a hostile Congress? And to me, that's a hostile Congress, both because the Republicans will probably still be in charge of the House unless Donald Trump is the nominee. They may lose the House. And because a significant part of the Democratic Party will oppose what Bernie wants to do because they're corporatists, they're Wall Street Democrats. And I'll just say again what I said before. It is not going to happen the next day. I hate to break this to you. When Bernie's inaugurated, the birds are not going to come out and sing. Well, they might. Sun's not going to. Well, it'll be January 20th in Washington. Birds are not going to be out singing. I'll tell you that. I've been at those inaugurations. They're cold. It's about a political revolution, and that is going to take time. And if you say to me, and I think we should just accept this, that it's going to take a decade, man, am I going to sign up for that? Because if we say that it's a 10-year project, but Bernie's in the White House to lead that, then we go after the Democrats. So I live in New York. You go to Chuck Schumer and you say, if you don't stop basically being Wall Street shill, we're going to take you out. And we're going to run somebody, and we're going to fund somebody to run against you. And we've proven that we can raise the money to challenge people like that. And that's going to take a long time. We have to unelect people. I already heard that there's a person running in the primary against, thank God, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I'm sending, I just want to, on record, I'm sending that person money. I don't really, it's enough for me that he sounds progressive enough to take her out. He's great. I'm sending him money. You can count on that. And I think everybody should, because if we can take out someone like that, that's also a message to the Democratic Party. We're going to have to work very hard. Yes, right behind you. Yes. And I think you also, yeah.
My name's Dan. Yeah, there's a question don't know if you know the answer any more than me, but over the decades, there's a specific group of people in the working class, white, high school educated people with no college education,
Yep.
who consistently vote more for the Republican Party. And it's not just explained by racial insecurity in the South, but it's true in Kansas, it's true in North Dakota. And it always makes it hard for more progressive candidates to win. Do you have any more insight to it?
No, so the question was for the internet folks, why do a lot of, as the gentleman asked, white working class without college education vote Republican in many circumstances? So I have two answers very quickly. One is that some of that comes around social issues, and in some states like West Virginia that used to be very Democratic, a lot of it's around guns and other things. And the second thing I'd say, it's precisely about why we need this political revolution. Because if you're anybody, whether you're white working class in West Virginia or a young person who basically has abandoned the process, you look at the Democratic Party and say, what do they stand for? And they're taking the same corporate money that Republicans are taking. If you look at the contributions, they're marching to the same tune. The reason the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed was because a bipartisan group of people basically handed the banks a gift. Both parties were bought off. And so if I'm a unionized guy in West Virginia and I see that, why should I vote for the Democrats on economic issues? They're not really seem to be standing up for me. And Bill Clinton. I'll tell you right now, I believe that one of the main reasons that we lost the House in the Gingrich Revolution, 1994, was because of Bill Clinton's push for NAFTA. Because the unions that I knew, if you look at the states, particularly where the Republicans did well, in that industrial heartland, unions went all out to defeat NAFTA. Went to their membership. I helped. I made phone calls. Right to the ground saying, we've got to defeat this. And so you have all those union people, white working class, without college education, who look up and see the President of the United States, a Democrat, advocating for a corporate trade treaty. That's why. And that's why we need the political revolution. Yes, young man.
What is he going to do about the fact that Puerto Rico is a colony owned by the United States?
So here's a question I have no answer for. Just because I don't know what his position is, actually, the question was, what will Bernie do when he's elected about Puerto Rico and its independence or whatever should be done? Honestly, you could see I know a lot. I just don't know what his position is. Well, we can talk afterwards if you don't mind. I'm happy to chat, but I also want to try to move along because I know some people probably want to go. It's Sunday night. You probably want to go to dinner and all that. You had a question, and then was there someone over here? Yes. I think you'll be the last person. But let the gentleman over here.
To my good friend sitting in front of me about socialism, I'd like to have a suggestion that everyone who questions Bernie's socialism is to remember that Franklin Roosevelt, who started Social Security, upon which everybody, millions of people rely upon on a monthly basis, is a socialist policy. And for those of you or those that are not here, that oppose Social Security or oppose socialism, they should return their checks every month.
The gentleman was pointing out that Social Security, which was put forth by FDR, is essentially a socialist program. I would venture to say that there was a guy who believed in very, very, very high tax rates on the rich and warned us of the danger of the military-industrial complex named Dwight D. Eisenhower, who today could not be elected in the Republican Party and would be called a communist, forget socialist. So we can just, it's all in context and spectrum. The last question is over here. You're making, are you going to ask it instead?
No, I want to ask you, you speak a lot, everybody, about Hillary, the mistakes, Iraq, Libya, we know all that. We read, we watch TV, we have computer. I want to know now, when we have in the geopolitical arena, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Sunni, Shia, ISIS, Yemen, all this Middle East in turmoil, if Bernie Sanders, what he wants to do, not always what did before Hillary, And if he is really present to deal with all these leaders in her political arena, Putin, I want to know not only about issues, social hours, because the moment in the planet is very dangerous.
So I can very clear.
Very dangerous.
Yeah. So Bernie has a very clear policy about this, and I think it's actually quite brilliant. He said it in debates about the Middle East and particularly ISIS. Well, in general, his point has been that the Muslim world has to unite and deal with it internally. And his point, well, excuse me, I'm not going to debate this with you. I'm just going to answer you. I'm going to answer what Bernie's position is. That's the best I can do. And his position is very clear. We can't be the military cop of the world. And that he has urged, he said this very public in debate. I'm not telling you anything that you have not heard. That's a problem that the Muslim world has to grapple with, both the civil strife, the sectarian strife, the creation of ISIS, because, to put it easily, it's in your backyard. He says the role of the United States should be, how do we help bring that together, bringing in Russia and other allies to help the diplomatic part. But we should not have a role militarily, and I totally support that. I think that is smart because, frankly, given what he has said about the mistakes we made, every time we go in with military force, it makes the situation worse. I want to thank Victor again and the bookstore for having me here. It's been really lovely. I really appreciate it. And did you want to come and say any closing words? And thank you for your attendance.
All right, folks, I'll just say very quickly that we do have the Essential Bernie Sanders for sale up there at the counter in the front room. Johnathan's going to be signing here at the table to the left of the podium. And this has been a terrific afternoon. Please give another hand to Johnathan Tasini. Thank you very much. Thank you.